Welcome to the Wildlife Wire. I'm Mark Searles,
And I'm Samantha Miller.
and this is your source for wildlife news and the people that make it.
Welcome to another thrilling episode of the Wildlife Wire. I am here with Will Harlan. He lives in North Carolina, where he's a biologist working for the Endangered Species program for the Center for Biological Diversity. He is our Southeast director and senior scientist. Prior to joining the center, Will worked for the Sierra Club, protecting forests and indigenous lands. He also wrote a national best-selling book, Untamed, The Wildest Woman in America, and The Fight for Cumberland Island. And his work has appeared in the New York Times and National Geographic. So welcome to the Wildlife Wire, Will Harlan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We are thrilled to talk to you about a species that we've been talking about a little bit in our news segment recently. And that species is called what is it called? A snot otter? Is that what I heard? And many other names.
Something about lasagna as well, I believe.
Yes, a lasagna lizard, I think. And a very cool indicator species, and that's the hellbender. And I know that, Will, you've been specifically working on the eastern hellbender, and our audience would love to know, what is a hellbender, as we've named the many names it carries, and why should folks be worried about the hellbender?
Yeah, y'all caught many of the names in that mash of words. So they're hellbenders are called a lot of different things because they're so colorful and charismatic. They have been called old lasagna sides, Allegheny gator, snot otter, all kind of describing this very unique salamander's appearance. They are the largest salamander in North America. They can grow 2.5 feet long, up to 4 pounds. We're talking a salamander that can get that large. And so, not surprisingly, they get really interesting names, hellbender being one of them. And so, hellbenders exist all across Appalachia and into the Ozarks, and they are freshwater specialists. They are indicators of clean rivers. Where there is clean water, there are hellbenders. At least there used to be. Sadly, they're in trouble. As we've lost clean water, we've lost hellbenders, and they've recently been proposed for Endangered Species Act listing. But they are some of the most spectacular species on the planet, and certainly kind of the mascots of the mountains here in Appalachia.
That is awesome. I saw an incredible picture of a mural of hellbenders, and that was painted, I think, was it Boone, North Carolina, where that was painted?
That's right. Boone, North Carolina has adopted the hellbender as kind of their mascot. The town of Boone has done a great job of protecting their rivers and clean water around the city. And with the Center for Biological Diversity's help, proposed and unveiled a mural in downtown Boone. Has a giant hellbender, but also, really importantly, a ton of other species surrounding it, crayfish and darters and all of the other species that hellbenders help protect. Hellbenders are places, like I said, where there's a lot of clean water, and that protects a lot of other species, rare, imperiled, and special species here in the Southeast.
Well, this is certainly different from what I thought we were. I thought we were going to share crazy stories from college of like 4-day benders, but I guess that was a different podcast that I was signing up for. So, why is clean water so important to a hellbender?
Well, when you see a hellbender, you might think you're on a mind-bending experience because they are so unusual looking. I'll get to the clean water question in a second, but they are really distinctive creatures. They've got tiny, beady little eyes that you can barely see. They've got flattened bodies and like ripple-like skin, giant skin folds, and then these paddle-shaped tails and grippy toes. All of this are adaptations for their lives in high gradient streams. They hang on in rivers and streams that have a lot of current, and they shelter under large boulders or just cling to the bottom of streams. But they have to hang on to some really strong currents at times, and they make their living on the bottoms of streams, just kind of hanging out as ambush predators. They will lurk under rocks and wait for crayfish to be swept past and grab them quickly. But otherwise, they live a pretty sedentary uh, life underneath boulders in these streams, and they've adapted to that life with a really unique appearance.
So,
But
so they're in those streams, they're facing upstream and waiting for the current to bring them these animals, or am I hearing
sometimes,
that?
yeah,
Okay.
they can exist upstream, downstream. They can hang on with their grippy toes. They can be pointed in any direction, and they walk around sometimes on the bottoms of streams too. But they have to stay in the water for the most part because they breathe through their wet skin. They have to keep that skin moist, and if they're out of water, they can dry out very quickly and die. But in water, they are the species that ensures that that water is clean. They can only survive in clean water because of that skin, those rippled skin folds are essentially their lungs. They breathe through that skin, and if the water is clogged with sediment, pollution, then so are they, and they can't breathe, they can't live. So they depend on clean flowing river for breathing, for feeding, for survival.
I'm imagining their skin as being like the difference between having a clean filter on your HVAC system at home and having it covered with dog hair and dirt and it's not doing its job, right? Same kind of situation there.
Yeah, in a sense, they're filters. Some of the other species that they help protect, the mussels here in southern Appalachia and in Appalachia, are even more like that metaphor where they are literally filtering the water for us. And that's something I like to think about a lot is how our rivers and streams, even big rivers like the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers, uh, accounts from like Lewis and Clark for the Mississippi and out west, and then other accounts from Bartram here in the east. Uh, those rivers used to be covered from stream bank to stream bank, from side to side with mussels, just blanketed in mussels. And those were the natural filters of our rivers. They would take in the sediment, they would take in any pollutants and filter our water for free. And they even got colorful names because people would try to walk across these rivers. So a lot of these mussels are named heel splitters, toe. So they have these really colorful names for what they did to people's feet when we used to walk across these rivers. Now, most of our mussels are endangered and facing real threats, the same threats that the hellbenders face. So, where there are mussels and hellbenders, there's clean water. And so, both of these species play an important role in protecting our water. And as they have declined, so have our rivers.
And you mentioned mussels. Can you explain a little bit more too about other species that rely on hellbenders? And then what animals are they specifically preying on as they're waiting there in the current?
Yeah, so salamanders, hellbenders are a kind of salamander, and uh, they support a whole cast of characters. All freshwater aquatic species are kind of under their umbrella. They're a keystone species and an umbrella species for hundreds of species of mussels here in the east, and mussels do some really cool things. I have to mention how they reproduce. So these mussels are just like clams. They look like clams if you can picture that, and so they can't move. So how do they reproduce? Well, they release glochidia. They release their babies in unique ways. These mussels don't have eyes. They're just two shells. They're bivalves. So what they do with their mantle, with their fleshy part of their bodies, is they will exude that out of the shell and lure fish and even some salamanders to come to their shell. And they will make that little fleshy thing look like a minnow, look like something to eat. And so a fish will swim up to it, or a salamander even, or a hellbender potentially, and look at that minnow and try to bite it. And as soon as they do, that muscle opens up and sprays its babies into that fish's gills. And that fish swims away, swims upstream, and carries mussel babies up and down the river. So it's a really creative, inventive evolutionary strategy that these mussels employ using salamanders and fish to carry their babies up and downstream because they can't move. So that's just one example of the uh, intricate puzzle of life under our waters that hellbenders are protecting. Mussels, fish, salamanders are all under kind of this umbrella that the hellbender provides, and it's a fascinating world, and it's visible for free. Y'all can grab a pair of goggles or a snorkel mask, stick your face into any river in the east, and you can watch this drama unfold.
Will we get sprayed with the babies of the mussels? That's one.
I think Elon Musk uses a similar strategy to.
Yep, I'm there with that. That's really fascinating. And does that reproduction, uh, does that way of reproduction impact the health of fish, or are fish just not harmed by that at all? They just are part of the ecosystem, and that's how it works.
Yeah, it doesn't have a significant negative effect on the fish that's transporting those babies. They'll dump them a few days later or a few weeks later. Sometimes they're kind of host for the babies as they grow. But it is actually a really important interdependence. A lot of mussels are declining, are endangered because their host fish has disappeared from the stream. There's some fish that are only attracted to specific mussels, and vice versa. Some mussels that can only have a specific fish come to it to carry its babies. So when either part of that partnership is not there, we lose mussels and fish. So really fascinating and important balance that's under our waters that we hardly even notice. And then there's some species, there's at least one species of mussel that is called the salamander mussel because it relies specifically on salamanders to come to its lure and carry its babies up and down river. So there's a lot of interactions happening right in our creeks and streams that we don't even pay attention to.
So, do other salamanders or newts have the same kind of issues as far as the need for really clean water?
Many of them do, not all. Some salamanders are even adapted to life on land. There are some plethodontid salamanders that can live under logs, and there's some green salamanders that can live in trees. But most salamanders are at least partially dependent on water, and many of them depend on very clean water. An exception might be eastern newts. They're a little bit more widespread. They can live in lakes and ponds, which sometimes have a lot more sediment. But most species of salamanders need that clean water, especially the larger salamanders like the hellbender.
Uh, So what is impacting then the survival of hellbenders? I understand they live a really long time, right? And we need clean water for them. What are the threats to their environment, and how long do they usually live?
Great questions. Just yesterday, we lost one of the oldest recorded hellbenders in history. A hellbender named Marvin died after 45 years of life. And we know they can live at least that long. That salamander happened to be in captivity, but salamanders can live for 20, 30 years in the wild, maybe more if they're in the right habitat and have enough food availability. We can talk a little bit about their really fascinating genetics in a moment, but they are long-lived species because they are very slow growing. They stay in a baby phase for life. They're called neoteny or neotenic, where they retain a lot of their juvenile characteristics into adulthood. And because they're these really slow growing, long lived species that don't move around a lot and stay put, they've kind of upended our traditional views of evolution. We think evolution is all about survival of the fittest and the strongest and the fastest and the sharpest teeth, but sometimes it's the slowest and the laziest and most lethargic that survive in this world. And the Hellbenders have found their niche, living under giant boulders and ambushing their prey, which includes anything that's floating past, crayfish, larval, flies, invertebrates, isopods. That they feed on a lot of things, especially on the bottoms of creeks and rivers and streams. But they're content with a more chill life, just hanging out under rocks and waiting for the food to come to them.
So you're saying the key to a long life is staying a baby and growing to abnormally large sizes and waiting for your food to come to you?
You got it.
Okay. I've been doing it all wrong.
Yeah, Hellbenders are living the dream. They they found a different strategy, which I think is pretty cool. I think um, you know the one reason for their longevity, and there's some other unique characteristics that come from this, including the ability to regenerate limbs and even parts of organs and their brain, is this unique way of survival that comes from both their kind of neotonic existence, this kind of permanent babyhood, but that is also a function of their genetics. So we humans, we have about 3 billion base pairs. Those are the little A's and T's and C's and G's that we learned about, that double helix thing. Our DNA, about 3 billion. Salamanders, especially large ones like hellbenders and water dogs, can have as many as 60 billion, 100 billion, 120 billion base pairs. That is, in some cases, 30 times more than we humans do. And that's not always advantageous. What that does to a genome is kind of turn the body into like a funhouse mirror. And that's what we see with this hellbender, is this kind of gigantic, gargantuan, grotesque being that has a baby face and swollen limbs and a unique bloated body that doesn't move very fast, but gets the job done. Its heart, for example, is as thin as like a paper sack. Like it has almost a transparent heart. So some of its cousins have these really thin, like one cell thick heart membranes that you can almost see through. So what's happening in this family of salamanders is that they have adapted to having this really large bloated genome that distorts their bodies, but actually becomes quite useful for their little niche in the ecosystem. So it's a different way that evolution has worked. It hasn't been to get stronger and faster. It's been to adapt to their circumstances and use their genetics to what works for them.
Yeah, that is incredibly fascinating. Are folks doing any research on the regenerative properties that hellbenders and other species of salamanders may have?
Yes. So now folks are realizing that these salamanders have superpowers, and we want some of those superpowers. And hellbenders, especially, are uh, able to, but all salamanders really are able to regenerate limbs. Part their tails when they're in combat. They will often drop their tails to distract predators as they scamper away. But they can, if they lose an arm, leg, they can regenerate that. And then in the lab, they've been even shown to regenerate parts of their brain when it's been removed. So even parts of their bodies that wouldn't normally be lost in the wild, they're able to regenerate. And they think that's because, again, they stay in this immature phase where a lot of their cells are like stem cells, which, if you're familiar with kind of developmental science, those are like the progenitor cells. Those are the embryonic cells that can become anything in the body. They can become a heart cell or a muscle cell. And so hellbenders and salamanders have a lot of these stem-like cells that can, when they're amputated, they can regrow whatever needs to be regrown.
That's so amazing. I'm blown away by these guys. And you mentioned mud dogs, right?
Yes,
And so in the world of giant salamanders, is that the closest to them, or like what other like one? How did this species evolve to be the one that's huge? Were there other species along the way that also grew to abnormally large sizes, and they just went extinct for whatever reason? Like, how did this happen?
it's a great question. Believe it or not, the hellbender is not the largest salamander in the world. Hellbenders are the largest in the United States, in North America, but the Chinese salamanders can get even larger. And there's the hellbender's sister species here in the United States are the water dogs in the Necturus family. They don't get quite as large. They have really frilly gills that also kind of fluff out on the sides of their heads. And then another cousin species is the axolotl, which are popularized by Minecraft and pop culture. Another kind of large salamander, baby face, funny looking, slow moving, amazing creature that has this regenerative ability. And hellbenders like axolotls have become pop celebrity icons, and we're seeing hellbenders in video games. They're being named for beverages, restaurants, and the city of Asheville just changed their professional soccer's team name to the Hellbenders, which I think is pretty badass. So a lot of folks are jumping on the Hellbender bandwagon. A lot of folks are taking pride in this species that is uniquely Appalachian, uniquely American. They're the only place in the world that they're found, especially here in the spine of the Appalachians. And although they're also found in the Ozarks in the middle of the country as well, but a unique species that for a long time were maligned. They were called the ugliest salamander in the world. Folks would kill them because they feared that they interfered with fishing, which they don't. They rarely feed on any fish that are of commercial value. So they're not a threat to fishing, and but they're just kind of unique looking. And some people assign them, devilish names like the Hellbender, thinking they were sinister, but in fact, they're really vital to the health of our rivers and streams. And I think the tide has changed, and people have now become big fans of Hellbenders across the political spectrum, across geographical boundaries. I think there's a lot of love for Hellbenders.
That's so great to hear. And we're understanding now that hellbenders are declining. How serious is their situation? Now that they've got this pop culture fame, they're also under threat. So, what are they facing today?
As I mentioned, they live mainly in Appalachia, and so they face a lot of the threats that Appalachia has faced for decades. Coal mining runoff, pollution from deforestation, all of the things that cause sediment to clog rivers are threats to hellbenders. Even development in progressive places like Asheville can clog rivers and streams and choke out hellbenders. So they need clean water, and that's becoming increasingly threatened. And sadly, we've seen a 60% decline in hellbenders over the past few decades. Only 12% of hellbender populations are stable, and that was before Hurricane Helene hit. Sadly, Helene hit hardest the places where hellbenders were doing best. So some of the most robust populations of hellbenders were in western North Carolina, in the Little Tennessee watershed, in the Cane and South Toe rivers, and that's exactly where Helene wreaked the most damage. And so we're more concerned than ever about hellbenders and their future.
So, my question is, I and it's more of a statement of fact. I know that you have personally stood in the way of heavy equipment like bulldozers to block the destruction of hellbender habitat. Can you talk to me about one, why you were there, and two, what other folks can do a bit if they want to advocate for salamanders like hellbenders?
Yes, the Hellbenders have suffered immense setbacks post Helene. Sadly, though, what has done more damage than Helene in some places has been the Army Corps of Engineers debris removal process. So after Helene hit, we lost a lot of salamanders, or they were flushed downstream. The floodwaters pushed a lot of hellbenders downriver, but some hung on. Many survived. And we saw this during Tropical Storm Helene, which wasn't quite as severe, but a study in Western North Carolina post Tropical Storm Fred showed that a lot of hellbenders survived this major flooding event and were able to hang on and come back even within a year. So we know hellbenders can survive floods and streams, that they're built for that. They live under rocks. They have these really grippy toes and ways to survive what has happened for millennia. Rivers flood. What doesn't normally happen, though, are bulldozers, dump trucks, backhoes being driven up and down rivers and streams. And that's what happened post Helene, especially by the Army Corps of Engineers. So they were paying contractors, and still are, to remove debris by the ton. So rather than focus on how many river miles are restored, they instead incentivized contractors and subcontractors, many of whom were out of state and had no familiarity with hellbenders or even the rivers and streams they were operating on, would come in with heavy equipment and use the rivers and streams where hellbenders live as highways and drive up and down repeatedly with heavy machinery to access woody debris in places where Helene didn't even hit, and take living trees and essentially bulldoze and clear cut riparian areas just to make as much money as they could to load their dump trucks, which is with as much debris, much of it living debris. And a lot was lost in that process. A lot of hellbender habitat was crushed. We have photos of mussels crushed by this heavy equipment going up and down rivers and streams. And so now they're facing even more existential threats because that work is ongoing. And so I, along with some other folks, went to one of the last best hellbender strongholds in Western North Carolina, and we flagged every rock that we knew hellbenders had been living beneath, and a really important 2-3 mile stretch of river that was especially important for hellbenders. And we knew that there were trucks moving in, and track hose and bulldozers that were entering the water just above this area. And so we waded out into the river and stood there in waist deep water and refused to move. And eventually that led to some productive conversations. We got out on land and talked with the equipment operators, who talked to their boss, who talked to their boss, and they ultimately agreed to stay out of that stretch of river. But there are thousands of river miles in Western North Carolina that are being threatened and affected by this debris removal, and we can't stand everywhere. We can't safeguard every one of those spots. So we're trying to get some better protections in place to prevent this heavy equipment from coming into all of the hellbender habitat. At least stay out of the most sensitive, high quality habitat where these hellbenders and mussels and endangered species reside.
So are they still using that same pay per ton format?
Yes. Now there's another way that they can do it. So some counties continue to use the Army Corps and their contractor that pays per ton. But then some counties have opted to use local contractors that are doing a very good job, that are staying out of the sensitive habitats, that are paying people per river mile rather than per ton. So we see in some counties in this area very good restoration work that's being done. So there is a clear example of how it could be done. and then how it's being done very poorly in the counties that are relying on the Army Corps.
Well, I certainly appreciate you and the other folks that were out there advocating for more responsible management of these projects, because I mean, without y'all, I mean, they certainly would have just continued on and just trying to maximize profits without thinking about any kind of ecological impact.
And as we talked about earlier, these are long-lived species. Hellbenders can live 20, 30 years, and they're remarkable species. The males guard the nests. So when they reproduce in the summer, the males will stand guard throughout August and September and guard those eggs with his life and not leave those sites. And so in these summer months now, as bulldozers and backhoes are coming into these rivers, those hellbenders are going to stay there and guard their eggs and potentially get crushed along with their eggs. So it's more important than ever that we protect these hellbenders and their habitat, and then all of the other species that depend on them, all of the mussels and darters and shiners and invertebrates that this whole web of life that they support, the insects that produce that support the robust trout fishing that drives our regional economy. This is one of the most popular places in the world for trout fishing. We have amazing brook trout in these waters as well. So keeping these giant pieces of equipment out of our streams, they can access the debris when they need to from land. They don't need to be using our precious rivers as roads and highways.
So speaking of roads and highways, so you mentioned uh, another location that you would have to take a highway or a plane to, where hellbenders live, and that's at the Ozarks. Ozarks and North Carolina are not close to each other. So does that mean that hellbenders once occupied that whole region?
Most likely they were much more widespread. And in fact, their range includes 15 states from New York to Georgia and west to Missouri and Arkansas. So they were once far more widespread. They weren't concentrated just in Appalachia, but that's primarily where the clean, cool rivers still remain. We used to have a lot more of them, and now they're primarily in the mountainous areas where we still have forest cover and more public lands and more protection. But yeah, there were probably hellbenders all over the southeast and eastern United States, and now they're just in a few pockets. The Ozarks of Missouri and Arkansas being one of them, where there's still a lot of forests and clean, cool rivers, and then here in Appalachia.
So, our listeners are going to want to know, what are steps they can do to protect hellbenders? How can they support your work and the work of others that are working to conserve species like hellbenders across Appalachia?
Come see them. Come snorkel in our rivers, or come fishing or canoeing or paddling, whatever you love to do that involves water. This is, you know, the salamander capital of the world. This is the hellbender capital of the world. And that's because we have so much fresh water here. And I think one of the most spectacular moments for me has been taking my kids snorkeling. They were dreading it. The water was cold. They had to put on their, uh, wetsuits. But once they put on that mask and put their face in the water, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. There was a whole uh, web of life under there, all these colorful fish swimming around right next to them that they had no idea was swimming right up to their ankles, and finding hellbenders under rocks and uh, brook trout, flashing by them. It was stunning for them and exciting for me to see that magic. That's available to all of us, and you don't even need a wetsuit. You can buy a $20 snorkel mask and just stick your face in any creek, river, stream in Appalachia or the Ozarks, and you'll see some really cool stuff.
That's incredible. And yes, Mark and I are notorious for subjecting our children to things like snorkeling or hiking or backpacking long distances. And so I actually read that there's actually a designated trail that goes through the river. There's a snorkel trail system. Is that correct?
Yes, North Carolina just started their Blue Ridge Snorkel Trail. Well, they picked out 10 key sites in rivers across this region where you can just and they have a display and information to help you know what you're seeing, so you can literally just stick your face in the water and look for particular fish or mussels or even salamanders, hellbenders that might be there, and know what you're looking at. And so it's a very simple, easy way for the public to take baby steps into the world of snorkeling and get to know the life that's literally right below the surface of our rivers and streams.
Are there guides that offer their services to do this? And my follow-up is there a fear of hellbender madness where millions of people come stick their faces in the water and then that actually ends up hurting the hellbenders?
There are guides that will take you out and they know the best places to see hellbenders and other really cool aquatic life. Yeah, and there's several really great ones that I'd be happy to recommend or include in your show notes. I think that would be a good problem to have if we had too many hellbender advocates, too many people wanting to go snorkeling. I would love to have that problem. We don't currently have that issue yet. And when we do, I think the people who want to go see hellbenders and colorful fishes are the same kinds of people who would want to respect any limits that need to be put on that activity. But we're nowhere close to that right now. We need all the advocates we can get to be advocates and ambassadors for these amazing leviathans.
More words that I cannot say. Well, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. And where can folks find you and find your work online?
I work for the Center for Biological Diversity, and we have a whole page dedicated to our work around hellbenders. They've just been proposed for endangered species status. That final rule hasn't arrived, but they are in a proposed endangered status, which gives them some protections. And the center's been working on that for more than a decade. So a lot of work has gone into those protections. And so all of that work can be found at biologicaldiversity.org, and you can reach me there as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining the Wildlife Wire, Will. We appreciate your time today. And it's really fun learning about something that isn't charismatic megafauna, which is where Mark and I usually live our lives. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for the great questions and a fantastic conversation.
Yeah. And now I have something, yet another thing to do when I go back home to North Georgia, to go on up to North Carolina and stick my head in some freezing cold water.
Perfect.
This has been an episode of the Wildlife Wire with me, Mark Searles, and my co-host, Samantha Miller. Thank you for listening.